My name is Abigail Monroe, and for 6 years I wasn't a daughter. I was a silent ATM with a pastry whisk. The salt air of Savannah felt like a chokehold as my father Harold stood before 200 elite guests at my sister's engagement gala. He raised a vintage crystal flute, his eyes gleaming with a cruel, familiar condescension. Abigail, he chuckled into the microphone, the sound amplified and mocking. She's the family's kitchen mouse. Some people are born to lead, and some, like my eldest, are simply born to serve the help. She's comfortable in the flour dust. It's the only place she doesn't fail. My mother Diane leaned into the mic with a sharp, polished grin. We tried to give her ambition, but I suppose some spirits are just pedestrian. She's much happier staying out of the spotlight so her sister can actually shine. The room erupted in stinging high society laughter. I stood in the shadows of the service entrance, my white chef's coat stark against the darkness. Suddenly the music died. Sebastian Vale, the billionaire groom-to-be, signaled the tech booth. The massive LED screen behind the podium flickered to life, displaying a $3.2 million investment term sheet with a global seal. Actually, Harold Sebastian's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. Abigail isn't a servant. She is the executive culinary director and an 18% equity partner for my Tokyo flagship project. The laughter evaporated. My father's face drained of color, turning a sickly mottled gray. I didn't say a word. I just watched the empire of their lies begin to crumble in high definition. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their control and exposed the $412,600 they bled from me, please take a second to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Also, leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I'll be reading every single one, and I'm so grateful for your support. The silence following Sebastian's announcement was thick enough to cut with a pastry knife. My father's hand trembled, the champagne in his glass rippling like a warning sign. But to understand how we got to this stage, to this high-stakes exposure in the heart of Savannah, you have to understand the 6 years of quiet, calculated theft that preceded it. My descent into the family's financial anchor began when I was 23. Fresh out of a grueling apprenticeship and fueled by the kind of naive ambition only a daughter seeking her father's approval can possess, I opened a boutique patisserie. It wasn't a gift, it was a gamble. I took the smallest, most dilapidated storefront in the historic district, a space no one else wanted. For 6 years, my life was measured in the rhythmic chime of a 4 a.m. alarm. While the rest of Savannah slept under moss-draped oaks, I was already in the kitchen, the air thick with the scent of fermenting yeast and high-fat butter. My hands were perpetually dusted in flour, my forearms mapped with the faint silvery scars of sugar burns and oven racks. I didn't mind the labor. I thought I was building a legacy for the Monroe name. Every month, like clockwork, I transferred an average of $5,700 into our family development fund. That's over $412,000 across 6 years, a staggering sum for a single operator pastry chef. It's for the collective future, Abigail, my father Harold would say, leaning back in his handmade mahogany chair, his voice booming with unearned authority. We're pooling our resources, investing in the Monroe brand. One day you'll thank me for the discipline. I believed him. I believed him even when I saw where that discipline was actually being spent. While I was scraping vanilla beans and balancing ledgers until midnight, my younger sister Lila was living a life choreographed for the lens. The Family Development Fund somehow manifested as a brand new Range Rover for her 22nd birthday. It funded her private content studio equipped with $15,000 lighting rigs and a revolving door of stylists who curated her effortless lifestyle. Lila was the face. I was the engine. She was the Monroe darling, an influencer with 450,000 followers who curated a world of aesthetics, luxury travel, and self-made success. I was the ghost in the kitchen who provided the artisanal cakes that served as props in her photo shoots, props she never once credited to me. The psychological warfare was subtle, a slow drip poison administered by my mother, Diane. Whenever Lila hosted a high-profile influencer brunch or a garden party for Savannah's socialites, I was never on the guest list. "Oh, darling, you wouldn't enjoy it," Diane would coo, smoothing my flour-stained apron with a touch that felt more like a dismissal than an endearment. "You're a creature of the kitchen. You have your textures and your temperatures. You'd be bored to tears by the social chatter. Besides, someone needs to stay back and ensure the macarons are perfect for the dessert tower, right? It's for the family, Abigail." "Family is everything," she'd remind me, using the word like a leash. The most cutting betrayal, however, wasn't the money or the social exclusion. It was the erasure of my identity as an artist. 3 years ago, I entered the International Culinary Awards in Lyon, France. It is the Olympics of the pastry world. I worked in secret practicing my sugar-pulling techniques until my fingers bled. When I won, when I stood on that stage in Lyon and held a gold medal, I thought that finally the dynamic would change. I thought my father would see me as a peer, a professional, a Monroe to be proud of. Instead, when I returned home, Harold sat me down in his office. He didn't look at my medal. He looked at a stack of invoices. "We aren't going to publicize this, Abigail," he said coldly. "The Monroe brand in Savannah is built on tradition, on our furniture, on Lila's modern charm. A master chef title makes you look independent. It makes you look like you don't need us. It would alienate our local base. Keep the medal in the drawer. Your job is to keep the ovens running, not to chase spotlights in France." He didn't just want my money. He wanted my silence. He needed me to remain the help, so he could continue to control the flow of cash that fueled his ego and Lila's vanity. I began to notice the discrepancies shortly after. I saw the tax filings where my contributions were listed as gifts to avoid business taxes. I saw the way Harold's eyes shifted when I asked about the expansion of my shop. But the breaking point came when I discovered the letters from the Georgia Secretary of State. Investors had been trying to reach me for years. High-end resorts, international developers, and culinary scouts had sent inquiries to the Monroe family business address. My father had intercepted every single one. He had forged my signature on refusal to collaborate forms. He had told the world that Abigail Monroe was unavailable or not interested in external ventures. He was gatekeeping my life to ensure the $5,700 monthly transfers never stopped. That was when the kitchen mouse stopped scurrying. I realized I wasn't a daughter being protected. I was a high-yield asset being liquidated. If they wanted me to be a master of my craft, I decided I would be, but I wouldn't just be crafting cakes. I would be crafting their downfall. I reached out to Sebastian Vale, Lila's fiancé, not as a sister-in-law, but as a business partner. Sebastian is a man of data and Resort's a man who loathes the very superficiality that Lila and my parents breathe. When I showed him my true portfolio, the awards from Lion and the forged documents my father had signed, the look on his face wasn't pity. It was respect. "They think you're a servant, Abigail," Sebastian had whispered during a secret meeting at one of his construction sites. "Let them keep thinking that, until the very second the floor drops out from under them." So for the last 8 months, I played the part. I woke up at 4 a.m. I baked the bread. I sent the money. I let my mother tell me I wasn't social enough for Lila's engagement party. I even baked the 5-tier gold leaf cake that sat in the center of the ballroom tonight. But as I stood in the service entrance tonight, watching my father mock my profession to a room full of people whose respect he craved, I knew the Family Development Fund was closed. The audit was coming. The Secretary of State was already reviewing the forgeries. And the $3.2 million Tokyo contract. It wasn't just a job. It was my exit ramp. I looked at Harold one last time. He was still frozen, staring at the LED screen that announced my independence to the world. He had spent 6 years trying to keep me small. In 6 minutes, I had become the biggest person in the room. The kitchen mouse was gone. The executive director had arrived. The confrontation at the gala was merely the explosion. The fuse had been lit months earlier in the cold fluorescent light of a post office branch in downtown Savannah. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to receive. A boutique hotel developer from Charleston had managed to track down my personal cell number, a number my father usually kept buried under the Monroe Furniture business line. Chef Monroe, the voice on the other end had said, sounding baffled. We were disappointed to receive your formal rejection of the $86,000 seasonal contract for our signature dessert lounge. We thought the terms were more than fair. I remember standing in the middle of my kitchen, a tray of cooling financiers in my hands, feeling the world tilt on its axis. Rejection, I whispered. I haven't seen a contract, let alone signed one. There was a long, pregnant silence. That's strange. We have a certified letter on file signed by an Abigail Monroe stating that you are retiring from external consulting to focus on family-held assets. It arrived 2 weeks ago. The financiers hit the floor. I didn't call my father. I didn't scream. Instead, I drove to the Georgia Secretary of State's local office and the Buncombe County Records Department. I spent 3 days digging through certified mail logs and business filing archives. What I found was a systematic assassination of my career. There weren't just 1 or 2 missed opportunities. There were 3 major contracts totaling $269,500 in lost revenue, all rejected via certified mail. Each letter bore a signature that looked terrifyingly like my own. My father hadn't just been stealing my monthly transfers, he had been building a cage out of forged ink to ensure I remained his captive revenue stream. When I finally walked into his wood-scented office that evening, the documents clutched in my trembling hands, I didn't find a man seeking forgiveness. I found a man who felt entitled to my life. You went digging? Harold asked, not even looking up from his ledger. He didn't deny it. He didn't even flinch. I did what was necessary to protect the Monroe legacy, Abigail. If you had taken those contracts, you would have been in Charleston or Atlanta half the year. If you go far away, who is going to carry this family? Who is going to fund Lila's expansion? You forged my name, Dad. I said, my voice eerily calm. You stole my future. I secured our stability. He barked, finally slamming his fist on the desk. You are an ungrateful child. We gave you the Monroe name. We gave you the space for that little bakery. You owe us your labor. You are the eldest. It is your burden to ensure your sister and your parents are taken care of. Taking those jobs would have been an act of pure selfishness. Behind him, my mother Diane appeared in the doorway, her face set in a mask of practiced disappointment. Abigail, really? Think of the optics. If you leave, the family brand looks fractured. We've worked so hard to build this image. Why must you be so difficult? Just go back to the kitchen, bake the orders for the weekend, and we'll forget this little tantrum happened. In that moment, the last thread of family snapped. They didn't see a daughter. They saw a machine that produced $5,700 a month and gold leaf cakes. They saw a gift they could tax advantage, and a servant who wasn't allowed to have a dream that didn't benefit them. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. My father expected a breakdown. He expected me to beg for his approval as I had for 29 years. But the fire inside me had gone cold, replaced by a crystalline surgical focus. I'm taking 2 weeks off, I said. You can't. Harold sneered. The orders for the Savannah Arts Festival are due. The deposits are already spent. I'm taking 2 weeks off, I repeated, turning on my heel. That night, I didn't go to my bedroom in the Monroe estate. I went to my bakery. I stayed up until dawn, not baking but cataloging. I pulled every receipt, every bank transfer, and every forged document I had uncovered. I packed my specialized copper bowls, my French knives, and my gold medal from Lyon into a single trunk. The next morning, I hung a sign on the door of the patisserie closed indefinitely. I moved into a small nondescript studio apartment near the marshlands paid for with a secret account I'd started months ago when the first red flags appeared. I blocked my father's number. I blocked my mother's guilt trip texts. I even blocked Lila, who was blowing up my phone because I hadn't finished the sugar flower prototypes for her wedding mood board. For 14 days, the Monroe household scrambled. Without my monthly transfer, Harold's investments began to bounce. Without my presence in the kitchen, their tradition was revealed as an empty storefront. They thought I was hiding, licking my wounds. They had no idea I was sitting in a glass-walled office with Sebastian Vale's legal team handing over a folder that would trigger a Georgia Department of Revenue audit that would make Harold's head spin. I was done being the Gon No Tem Lang, the silent debt carrier. If they wanted to treat our relationship like a business, it was time for a hostile takeover. Leaving Savannah wasn't just a move, it was an exorcism. I drove 248 miles north to Atlanta, the humid coastal air of my childhood, replaced by the metallic high-octane energy of a city that didn't know the name Monroe. In Savannah, I was a kitchen mouse. In Atlanta, I was a ghost, and ghosts are very good at working in the shadows. I didn't open another boutique bakery. I had learned my lesson about the vulnerability of storefronts. Instead, I took a position in a high-end research and development R&D pastry lab. It was a sterile stainless steel sanctuary where food met chemistry. I wasn't just baking. I was engineering textures, stabilizing molecular foams, and developing proprietary dessert lines for international hotel chains. For 3 years, I lived a life of monk-like discipline. I rented a minimalist studio in Buckhead far from the social circles my family frequented. My routine was relentless, the lab by 5 a.m., the archives by 6 p.m. I stopped looking for approval and started looking at compound interest, because I was no longer feeding the family development fund. My income, which had nearly tripled, belonged entirely to me. By the end of my 3rd year in Atlanta, I had quietly accumulated $210,000 in liquid capital. But money was only half the battle. I needed professional armor that my father couldn't pierce with a forged signature. That armor came in the form of Eleanor Whitaker. Eleanor was the former president of the Southern Pastry Chefs Association, a woman whose palate was considered the gold standard of the industry. She was 61, sharp-tongued, and notoriously difficult to impress. She didn't do mentorship, and she certainly didn't do family drama. I sent her a single box. No letter, no resume, just 6 yuzu-infused eclairs with a structural integrity that shouldn't have been possible in the Georgia humidity. 2 days later, she walked into my lab. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask about my feelings. She simply pointed at the eclairs and said, "The crumb structure is flawless. Why are you wasting your time in an R&D lab when you should be defining the industry?" Under Eleanor's public endorsement, my name began to circulate in the upper echelons of the global culinary scene. She didn't save me. She simply validated what I already knew. She made it impossible for anyone to call me just a baker ever again. When she spoke, the industry listened, and one of the people listening was Sebastian Vale. Sebastian hadn't forgotten the ghost from the Savannah kitchen. He was in the process of conceptualizing a $3.2 million flagship resort in Tokyo, a project that required a culinary director with both technical mastery and the grit to survive a high-pressure international launch. He reached out to Eleanor, who facilitated a meeting at a private club in Midtown Atlanta. When Sebastian walked in, he looked at me with a mixture of surprise and profound recognition. He was still engaged to Lila at the time, but the distance between his world and hers was clearly widening. "I've been looking for the person who designed the desserts for the Savannah Arts Festival 3 years ago," he said, sliding a folder across the table. My investigators told me that person had retired. Eleanor tells me that person is currently the most sought-after R&D consultant in the South. The retired version of me was a fiction created by my father. I said, my voice as cool as the marble table between us. Sebastian leaned forward. I don't care about your family's fictions, Abigail. I care about the Tokyo project. I need an executive culinary director who can own 18% equity and build a world-class program from the ground up. But there's a condition. What? Absolute secrecy, he said. My relationship with the Monroe family is complicated. Until this project is ready for its grand reveal, no one can know you are involved. Not your father. Especially not Lila. I didn't hesitate. I signed the non-disclosure agreement NDA right there. For the next year, I lived a double life. By day, I was a quiet lab consultant. By night, I was on Zoom calls with architects in Tokyo and logistics managers in Lyon. I was designing a 3-story dessert atelier in the heart of Ginza. I was vetting suppliers for Hokkaido cream and French chocolate. The Monroes, meanwhile, were drowning in their own delusions. Through the grapevine, I heard that Harold had tried to launch a Monroe signature line of pastries using a series of hired hands, all of whom quit within months because they couldn't replicate my recipes or my work ethic. Lila's influencer brand was beginning to fray. Her lifestyle was expensive, and without my monthly $5,700 infusion, the cracks in the family's finances were becoming canyons. They sent me occasional emails, Diane pleading for family unity, Harold demanding I return to my senses and my duties. I never replied. I let them believe I was struggling in Atlanta, perhaps working a low-level line job, humbled by the real world. They had no idea that while they were planning Lila's wedding of the century at a Savannah resort, I was the one who had already secured the contract for that very resort's global expansion. The Tokyo project wasn't just a job. It was my masterpiece of revenge. Every recipe I developed, every equity point I negotiated, was a nail in the coffin of their control. I was no longer the girl who baked the cake for the party she wasn't invited to. I was the woman who owned the company that was building the ballroom. When the invitation to Lila's engagement gala arrived, sent by a mother who still thought she could manipulate me into catering the event for free, I didn't decline. I accepted. I didn't go there to reconcile. I went there to watch the LED screen. I went there to watch the Family Development Fund meet the Georgia Department of Revenue. As I stood in that service entrance in my white coat watching my father raise his glass to mock me, I felt a strange sense of peace. He thought he was giving a toast to my failure. He didn't realize he was giving the eulogy for his own empire. The secret was out. The 3,200,000 Tokyo project was real. My 18% equity was real. And the look of pure, unadulterated terror on Harold's face as he realized his kitchen mouse now had more net worth than his entire furniture business. That was the sweetest thing I had ever made. Let's take a breath here. Have you ever been the one holding everything together while being treated like you're nothing? If you've ever survived a family that used your talent but hated your success, comment "Unstoppable" below. Stick around, because the next part is where the receipts finally hit the table and their facade shatters. The humid Savannah evening was thick with the scent of jasmine and the cloying perfume of old money. Lila's engagement gala at the Harborview Resort was designed to be the crowning achievement of the Monroe social calendar. The ballroom was a sea of champagne silk and tuxedoed arrogance, a carefully curated stage where my family intended to perform their greatest lie, the image of a unified, prosperous dynasty. I had arrived 2 hours early as instructed by a flurry of frantic, demanding texts from my mother, but I hadn't come as a guest. "Abigail, thank goodness you're here," Diane had whispered, pulling me into a side alcove the moment I stepped through the service entrance. She didn't look at my face. She looked at my hands, checking for flour. "Listen, we need you to stay back in the catering staging area. The resort staff is competent, but they don't have your touch. Just stay out of sight and make sure the dessert towers look Monroe standard. We need to look professional tonight. This isn't the time for your little career talk. My father had intercepted me minutes later near the cooling racks. He adjusted his cufflinks, his eyes cold and warning. I'm warning you, Abigail. Tonight is about Lila and her union with the Vales. Do not mention your projects in Atlanta. Do not talk shop with the guests. People are here to celebrate a marriage, not to hear about your baking experiments. You are here to support your sister. Period. The irony was a bitter pill, but I swallowed it with a practiced neutral expression. They wanted me to be the invisible engine again, the Chef Monroe, who provided the substance while they provided the sparkle. Lila, draped in a custom-made gown that likely cost 3 months of my previous contributions to the family fund, drifted into the kitchen area 10 minutes before the toasts. She looked at me not as a sister, but as an appliance that had finally been plugged back in. "Oh, Abby, you're actually here," she sighed, checking her reflection in a stainless steel prep table. "Great. Look, the catering lead is being difficult about the gold leaf placement on the main cake. Just go stand in the back of the kitchen and oversee the plating. I don't want any help visible when the photographers come through, but I need it to be perfect. Stay in the kitchen, okay? It's where you belong." So I did exactly what they asked. I put on my crisp white chef's coat, the one with the subtle embroidered logo of the Tokyo project hidden under the lapel. I stood in the shadows of the catering line, watching through the circular windows of the swinging doors as my father took the stage. The room fell silent as Harold raised his glass. I watched him deliver the speech I had expected, the one where he belittled my hobby while basking in the glow of Sebastian Vale's family prestige. He called me a servant of the craft, a quiet girl who preferred the heat of the oven to the light of the sun. The guests chuckled, that polite, devastating laughter of the elite who view labor as a personality flaw. But then the script changed. Sebastian Vale didn't stay in his seat. He didn't smile at Lila's rehearsed giggle. He stood up, his gaze sweeping across the room, ignoring the man at the podium. He wasn't looking for his fiancé. He was looking for me. He knew exactly where I was. He had spent months planning this moment with me in glass-walled offices 250 miles away. He signaled the tech booth, and the music, a soft orchestral piece, abruptly died. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant, and suddenly very cold. Sebastian turned toward the service doors. He didn't whisper. He didn't lean into a microphone. He used the voice of a man who owned the land everyone was standing on. "Chef Monroe," he called out. The name echoed off the vaulted ceilings. My father froze his glass halfway to his lips. Diane's forced smile faltered, her eyes darting toward the kitchen doors in a panic. Lila's face tightened, her influencer mask cracking in real time. "Chef Abigail Monroe." Sebastian repeated louder this time, his tone commanding. "I believe the executive director of my most ambitious global project shouldn't be standing in the dish pit." The room became a vacuum. No one breathed. The socialites, the investors, the local politicians, they all turned as one toward the swinging doors. I didn't hesitate. I pushed the doors open. The light of the ballroom was blinding after the dimness of the kitchen, but I didn't squint. I walked out, the heels of my boots clicking against the polished marble with the rhythm of a closing argument. I wasn't the kitchen mouse anymore. I wasn't the ungrateful daughter or the silent debt carrier. As I walked toward the podium past my gaping mother and my trembling sister, I saw the exact moment the reality of the situation hit Harold. He saw the way Sebastian stepped aside to give me the center of the stage. He saw the way the elite guests, people who knew the Vale name meant billions, immediately shifted their posture. The help had just become the boss. "Sebastian," I said, my voice steady, carrying to the very back of the hall, "I believe we have some documents that require a more public review than my father intended." I reached into the pocket of my chef's coat and pulled out a slim black tablet. With a single swipe, I bypassed the resort's looping slideshow of Lila's childhood photos. The massive LED screen behind the stage flickered. It didn't show a cake. It didn't show a wedding. It showed a high-resolution scan of a $269,500 contract rejection letter dated 2 years ago. And right next to it, in a zoomed-in split screen, was a side-by-side comparison of my actual signature and the clumsy, forged imitation my father had penned to keep me trapped in Savannah. "Dad," I said, looking him directly in the eye as the room erupted into a low, horrified murmur. "You told me I was ungrateful. You told me I was the burden. But it looks like you've been signing my name to your lies for quite some time." The collision had begun, and this time I wasn't the one who was going to be crushed. The ballroom, once a sanctuary of Monroe vanity, had transformed into a high-stakes courtroom. The air was charged with a clinical freezing tension. As I stood center stage, the silence of 200 guests was so absolute that I could hear the hum of the LED processors behind me. Sebastian didn't just stand there. He took the role of the architect of their destruction. He nodded to the tech booth, and the screen behind us flickered, transitioning from the forged signatures to a series of high-definition financial dossiers. "Let's talk about the little baker." My future father-in-law was so fond of mocking. Sebastian's voice resonated, devoid of any warmth. "Because while Harold was telling you all that Abigail was a servant to the craft, I was vetting her as a global partner." The screen flashed Project Tokyo Flagship Atelier. Beneath it, the figures burned into the retinas of every socialite in the room. Investment value $3,200,000. And then, the killing blow, Executive Culinary Director Abigail Monroe, 18% equity share. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. In Savannah's hierarchy, $3.2 million wasn't just success, it was a seismic shift. My 18% stake made me on paper wealthier than my father's entire furniture legacy. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't just about my success. It was about their theft. I spent 6 years being told I was a burden. I said, my voice steady and cold. I was told my contributions were barely keeping the lights on. But let's look at where that money actually went. The screen shifted again. This wasn't a PowerPoint, it was an evidentiary timeline. The first slide displayed the certified mail logs from the Georgia Secretary of State. It showed 3 distinct refusal of service letters for contracts totaling $269,500. Next to them were the tracking numbers linked directly to my father's business address. Then the audio started. A voicemail recording began to play over the ballroom's premium sound system. It was my father's voice, not the polished patriarch version he used for guests, but the snarling, desperate version he used when he thought no one was recording. "Listen to me carefully," Harold's recorded voice boomed. "If you contact my daughter again with a direct offer, I will make sure your development permits in this county are tied up in litigation for a decade. Abigail stays here. She works for the Monroe name, or she doesn't work at all. Consider this her final refusal." The guests began to whisper sharp, judgmental sounds that cut through the room like glass. Harold's face didn't just pale, it turned a bruised, mottled purple. He reached for the podium to steady himself, his glass finally slipping from his fingers and shattering on the marble. "And then there's the matter of the Family Development Fund." I continued, clicking the remote in my hand. The screen displayed a tax discrepancy report from the Georgia Department of Revenue. It highlighted a staggering $118,430 in misclassified income. For 6 years, my parents had been taking my monthly transfers and filing them as gifts to avoid payroll and business taxes, effectively committing a 6-figure fraud while using the money to fund Lila's influencer lifestyle. My mother told me I was pedestrian, I said, looking at Diane. Her hands were shaking so violently her pearls rattled against her collarbone. She told me I didn't belong in the spotlight. But while she was busy hiding my International Culinary Award from Lion, the gold medal I won while she claimed I was failing, she was also busy signing off on tax returns that would land most people in a federal audit. I pulled the Lion registration record onto the screen. The gold seal of the French Republic sat mockingly next to my mother's name on a fraudulent tax form. Lila was the first to break. The lifestyle influencer looked like a ghost in her expensive gown. Her 450,000 followers couldn't save her from the fact that her self-made brand was built on the back of a sister she treated like a servant. She looked at Sebastian, her eyes wide with a desperate, manipulative plea, but he didn't even glance her way. He was looking at me, the partner he had chosen in the dark. "The reason I'm here tonight isn't to cater your engagement, Lila." I said the words falling like stones into a well. "And it's not to play the role of the grateful daughter, Harold. I'm here because the authorities in Atlanta and the Department of Revenue have been briefed on every single one of these documents for the last 8 months. The audit isn't coming, it's already here." As if on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom opened. 2 men in charcoal suits, investigators who had been waiting for the signal, walked in. They didn't make a scene. They didn't need to. Their presence alone confirmed that the Monroe legacy was no longer a business. It was a crime scene. Harold tried to speak, his mouth working like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. He had spent his life controlling the narrative, but he had forgotten one thing: I was a scientist of recipes. I knew exactly how to balance the ingredients of a downfall. I stepped down from the podium, my white chef's coat gleaming under the chandeliers. I walked past my father, past the shattered glass of his champagne, and past the sister who didn't recognize the woman I had become. "The kitchen mouse is finished, Dad," I whispered as I passed him. "But I saved you a piece of cake. I hope you enjoy the aftertaste." I walked out of the ballroom, Sebastian following a step behind me. Behind us, the engagement of the century dissolved into a frantic, hushed scramble of socialites fleeing a sinking ship. I didn't look back. I had a flight to Tokyo in 4 hours, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anyone's debt but my own. The aftermath of the revelation didn't explode. It bled. As the investigators from the Department of Revenue began their quiet, systematic work in the hotel's side offices, my family cornered me in the marble corridor leading to the valet. The gala was still technically happening behind us, but the music had turned into a funeral dirge of hushed whispers and the frantic clicking of socialites' heels as they fled the scandal. Harold was the first to reach me. The patriarch's mask had slipped entirely, leaving behind a frantic, aging man whose hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Abigail, wait, just stop for a second. You've had your moment. You've made your point. But this calling in audits, displaying private family matters on a screen. This is a misunderstanding, honey. We can fix this. We're your parents." Diane flanked him, her eyes brimming with the kind of calculated tears she had used to manipulate me since I was a child. "Think of your sister Abigail. You've ruined her engagement. You've destroyed her reputation in a single night. Blood is thicker than water, darling. You can't just throw away 29 years of family because of a few financial, creative choices. We're Monroes. We stick together." I stopped and turned. Sebastian stood 5 paces behind me, a silent obsidian wall of support, but he didn't intervene. He knew I didn't need a savior. I needed a conclusion. "You're right, Diane," I said, my voice devoid of the anger they expected. Anger is high energy. I was simply cold. We share DNA, we share a last name, but after tonight, that is where the connection ends. We aren't a family. A family is a sanctuary. You treated me like a line of credit. A family protects. You forged my signature to keep me small enough to fit under your thumb. It was for the business. Harold hissed, his desperation turning back into a flicker of his old rage. Everything I did was to ensure the Monroe name survived. "No," I countered, stepping closer until he had to look up at me. You did it to ensure your comfort survived. You traded my career for Lila's Range Rover. You traded my Lion Gold medal for your tax-exempt status. I didn't ruin this family tonight, Harold. I just finally gave you the bill for 6 years of services rendered. I pulled a small white envelope from my coat and handed it to him. It wasn't a birthday card. It was a formal notice of severance from my legal counsel. As of 8 p.m. tonight, I stated, every automatic transfer to the Family Development Fund has been permanently terminated. I have filed a formal affidavit of forgery with the Georgia Secretary of State regarding the contracts you blocked. And since you misclassified $118,430 of my income as gifts to avoid taxes, the Department of Revenue is now opening a full-scale audit of Monroe Fine Furniture and Lila's Influencer Corporation. You're bankrupting us, Lila whispered, her voice cracking. She looked at the expensive silk of her dress as if it were already turning to rags. I'm not doing anything but telling the truth, I replied. The bankruptcy is a result of your own math, not mine. I'm withdrawing all legal and financial associations with the Monroe name. If you want to keep the house, I suggest you start selling the furniture Harold is so proud of. Or perhaps Lila can film a "Get Ready with Me" for her upcoming deposition. I didn't wait for their response. I walked out into the cool, salt-tinged Savannah night. I didn't feel the weight of betrayal that they tried to heap on my shoulders. I felt the lightness of a debt finally paid not by me, but by them. The consequences weren't instantaneous, but they were absolute. Over the next 6 months, the Monroe Empire didn't vanish in a flash. It eroded. The Georgia Department of Revenue's audit was a surgical strike. They uncovered years of creative accounting in Harold's furniture shop, leading to massive back tax penalties and interest that drained their remaining liquidity. The shop stayed open, but the prestige was gone. No high-end client in Savannah wanted their custom mahogany dining table built by a man whose face had been on the front page of the local business journal for fraud. Lila's downfall was swifter. Within 48 hours of the gala, 2 of her major lifestyle brand partners, a luxury skincare line and a boutique hotel chain, issued statements terminating their contracts. They cited values misalignment and the unverified nature of her brand's financial transparency. Her follower count plummeted as the self-made narrative was exposed as a lie, funded by the sister she mocked. She wasn't canceled, she was simply irrelevant. As for the wedding of the century, it never happened. Sebastian Vale didn't just call off the engagement. He issued a formal statement that his company would be pursuing legal restitution for the misrepresentations made during the initial investment talks with Harold. I watched it all from 6,700 miles away. In Tokyo, the air was different, crisp, electric, and full of the scent of toasted sesame and high-grade matcha. My 18% equity in the Vale Tokyo project turned out to be the most lucrative decision of my life. I spent my days in a 3-story glass atelier in Ginza, overseeing a team of 30 chefs who respected me, not because of my name, but because of my technique. I still bake. I still wake up at 4 a.m. But now, when I put on my chef's coat, the name embroidered over my heart doesn't represent a debt. It represents a brand. I received one final email from my mother last month. It was short-stripped of its usual flowery manipulation. She asked for a short-term loan to cover the property taxes on the Savannah estate. She promised to pay it back as soon as things settled. I didn't even have to think about it. I hit the delete key and went back to my tempering chocolate. In the world of high-end pastry, if you don't follow the recipe exactly, the structure collapses. My family tried to change the ingredients of my life to suit their taste. They forgot that I'm the one who knows how to handle the heat. The Monroe legacy in Savannah is a cautionary tale of greed. But here in Tokyo, the Monroe name, my name, is a masterpiece. The most dangerous lie I ever believed was that my value was defined by how much of myself I could pour into others' empty cups. For 6 years, I operated under a paradox of service. In the eyes of my family, the more I provided, the less I mattered. When you become the invisible foundation of someone else's lifestyle, they stop seeing you as a person and start seeing you as a utility, like the electricity in their walls or the water in their pipes. They only notice you when the flow stops. If there is one thing I hope you take away from my journey from the humid kitchens of Savannah to the high-tech ateliers of Tokyo, it is this: family is a choice, not a life sentence. Shared DNA is a biological fact, but shared respect is a moral requirement. You are not ungrateful for refusing to be exploited. You are not selfish for reclaiming the fruits of your own labor. Setting a boundary isn't an act of revenge, it is an act of self-preservation. When I walked out of that gala, I wasn't trying to hurt Harold, Diane, or Lila. I was simply refusing to let them hurt me anymore. I stopped carrying their debts so I could finally start building my own equity. True success isn't just about the $3.2 million contracts or the equity shares. It's about the peace of mind that comes when you no longer have to ask for permission to exist in your own skin. If you are currently the silent anchor for people who mock your dreams while spending your paycheck, hear me clearly, the door isn't locked from the outside. You hold the key. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this journey. If Abigail's story resonated with you or gave you the courage to look at your own boundaries, please hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a chapter. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose yourself over a toxic situation? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all, and they mean the world to me. And if you're looking for more stories of justice, resilience, and pro-revenge, be sure to check the links in the description. Until next time, stay unstoppable. Goodbye.